This is Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, WEFT Champaign, 90.1 on your FM dial. And it's Valentine's Day, and it's going to be -4 degrees tomorrow. So have to keep those flowers inside. They won't survive outside. Okay, we have two ambitions today. The one is to run a prairie enthusiasts program. Prairie enthusiasts have been involved for a long time, and they got good information. And then after that, we'll deal with a canyon in the Middle Fork, and I'll explain that. So right now, let's look at the prairie enthusiasts. Wisconsin has a lot of rolling ground, and it's not as fertile as some of the ground in east central Illinois. So they have a little more opportunity to do prairie preservation than we, and there's little pockets that they can fit into, and there's remnants. So for many years, they have been doing this work, and they will appear at the North American Prairie Conferences and other places. And the leaders in the field, they have had made a film. It's just 26 minutes long, which helps to explain what they do. It especially helps to explain people who don't do a lot of outdoor work, but coming to it. So we will run that film, and then I might say a little more about it. But it's a promo for helping us to not only get volunteers for specific jobs, but CEOs who can cover several of the fields. And they cover their fields. They cover burning, and they cover a lot of other things. So at this stage, we'll ask for Jason to put that film in. Now, I have, presumably we have that film in, and it's on a website. It's you go to the mission statement, and the mission statement will have in it a video. Hit on the video, and it's a little bit over 26 minutes, and very helpful. We have a lot of the same sort of material locally, not as generous, but because we don't have very much prairie left. But the same sort of things go on. We need jobs like picking seed and distributing seed, cleaning seed, eliminating invasive species, perhaps spot herbiciding trees if we have some, thinning out savannas. Savannas are where there are a few trees, and they've survived very well. But once you drain the fields, then a lot of other trees come in, and the shrubs too, and they sort of stop the growth. So what they've been doing is keeping the savanna trees, which are mainly bur oak and sometimes cottonwoods. They're deep rooted and can get water from the aquifers in dry times, but also they have strong barks that don't suffer from burning. But most of the invasive species are subject to burning, so burning is a weed control process too. But it also helps to remove the litter and let heat and light get into the prairie early in the season, and it will split open seed that is otherwise hard to bust open, and it will cause a plethora of growth that is rather wonderful. And do it perhaps every 3 or 5 years, depending on the situation, and it helps people to know what's growing and to note the phenology of the creatures that are there, whether they're plants or animals. They have a life cycle, and we don't know very much about it. So it's very helpful if you can be out in the uh, prairie observing uh, creatures doing things, whether they're plant or animal, uh, in their native habitat. And you can also notice when change occurs. If the climate is changing, the phenology will change. And so the the enthusiasts are holding a conference on Zoom, and I think it costs about $60 if you're a member, and a little bit more than that if you're not. Um, but they will be running for 3 or 4 days from the 24th to the 27th of February. And I think you could probably benefit from that quite a bit. Uh, they will have an agenda so you can pick your species and what you might want to do. And that's the 24th and the 27th. And I think it's well worthwhile. These are people that have been around for a long time. The word enthusiast might indicate to you that there's something quick and local, but it's not. It's something that's been around for a long time. So they know their onions, and they know this prairie species, and they can help you. It was kind of interesting. Uh, the Sierra Club was meeting this week. They have a once a month meeting, and it's a sort of get together, and it's very interesting. It's been getting to be a talk show, and so 10 or 15 people, and they used to end up in a small bar somewhere or move the concept around, as other community agencies do, and uh, as with the uh, Zoom, uh, we can call into a number and call in with a passcode, and that gets us on the screen. Uh, uh, Stuart Levy uh, does the administration, and the administration can be quite helpful for Sierra Club. It has been rather sort of loose because people are not quite used to it yet. We're all getting used to it. But the cities have been on Zoom for a long time. They can uh, mute people uh, other than the city council, or I went to uh, the Urbana City Council, which does this. And then when if you're a visitor and you want to speak, or they want you to speak, you can come up on the screen. You get unmuted. Uh, it allows us to go to meetings that we probably wouldn't go to before, because especially in virus time, we don't want to travel. So uh, Sierra Club is going through that, and there are a lot of people who've been doing interesting things, talking about their backyards where trees were removed, and they noticed that the uh, ecosystem has changed. In one case, to uh, milkweeds and butterflies, and so we had quite a little bit of feedback there. But before getting too long, I wanted to say something about the Middle Fork of the Vermilion. Clark Bullard was invited to be there. Clark Bullard has been involved with environmental things for a long time, and from Allerton and from working with the federal government for a while, and uh, being an engineer, and very interested in canoeing, especially on the Salt Fork and the Middle Fork. And he he's a little concerned about a canyon. The canyon is way up on the Salt Fork. I probably should say that there are three catchment areas for the Vermilion River, and the one that comes from Champaign, the Boneyard, is the Salt Fork because there was a salt mine that the native population knew about and was rather important for early settlers. Salt was used to conserve food, and it was also covered strange tastes and things like that. So salt was important, and it was important for livestock that also need a certain amount of salt. And these days, you have to provide it by having salt licks for livestock. Then there is the Middle Fork, which runs back from about 74 and 150 over by Danville and up on the west side of the Danville up into Ford County. Uh, it has been, the whole area has been strip mined a lot. But then there is the North Fork, which joins a little later, and all of them become the Vermilion River, and it goes down to the Wabash, into the Ohio, into the Mississippi, and into the Gulf. The early settlement uh, did involve mining, and quite a few of the early miners came from Kentucky uh, mining, and quite a few of them had 5-acre lots where they could, it was deep mining, uh, and you needed pit ponies to pull the coal out, and you needed fodder for pit ponies. So the Kentucky people knew how to do that. And if you go to Danville, you'll find the ethnicity of uh, Kentucky and Tennessee and those states that were coming north. Uh, then there was a movement to do strip mining, and they used the river or the Salt Fork or, uh, or the Middle Fork to sort of erode the ground, and it was like you plowed with a plow, and you had to remove the overburden, and uh, the fact that the river had carved its way through the landscape was very helpful. Uh, so you could have a new furrow and a new seam of coal, and then you plowed that one, and you exposed another seam of the same seam, but another portion of the seam, and that sort of did most of the pit pony crowd out of business, and uh, so they look for in other industries, and Danville has had some of those sorts of industries. Some of them have opted out. I think the General Motors had a unit there, and uh, so these are people who have 5 acres of secondhand cars that they repair and sell, or they love to be on motorcycles. The strip mines left the hills and valleys, and there weren't any really regulations at that time for the planting of a certain number of trees. Uh, so the uh, off-road vehicles enjoy these sorts of landscapes. Well, some of them have become the Kickapoo State Park, and if you stand on the bridge, which is the Kickapoo Trail, which is 100 feet above the surface of the ground, then you can see and hear uh, off-road vehicles underneath on areas that have been strip mined. Not exciting to some people, but if you're caring about providing opportunities, then surely the off-road vehicles have a need. Beyond that, there are mountain bicycles or off-road bicycles, and Vermilion County has become a seat for such activities. And I think they've kind of lost some of the motorcycle events. If you want to know where some of this is accessible so you can see it, you go to on 150 through Oakwood, and eventually you'll come to uh, a bridge over the Salt Fork Creek. The Salt Fork of this Vermilion comes in from Champaign and drops a little to the south. But there's a nice parking lot there, and you can get out and you can see the strips of the strip mining. You can get some idea of the history. And there's a road into the Kickapoo State Park. It's been closed for a while, but now it's being opened so that the trail people will have access. There's a fairground there. It's actually owned by the state, and it has some of the vehicle activities that I speak about. There are demolition derbies there regularly, and this is an interesting juxtaposition with nature and nurture that's going on at the same time. There are lots of ponds where left over these furrows of uh, strip mining are there. There it has been a coal burner there, and Illinois Power closed that out probably 10 years ago. But they're tailings. When you bring coal up out of the soil, it's in big knobs, and it's often dirty with some overburden, and it's washed. And there's been a lot of controversy about this because the tailings, after the washings are finished, go into ponds, and they're kind of leaking into a river that has been stated as a national uh, clean stream. And so there's a balance between the nature and the uh, use of the natural areas. And a lot of this is fairly close to the bottomlands. Uh, but in one or two places, the bluffs are high enough. You can see it in contour maps. Uh, so it's a canyon-like experience. We don't have much of that, and when you get into a canyon, you start to get shade, and you get a whole bunch of other niches for animals and plants to fit in. So it's a rather unique experience. So one of uh, Clark Bullard's concerns is, and he would like it to be more of a public involvement than it is at the moment, uh, is that the off-road bicycles are getting to be a national event. They have rough, tough territory. They could run along the Kickapoo Trail and probably will, but that's easy stuff. These are people who are into rugged uh, bends and drops, and so they're outlining around the top of this canyon. It's like going around the mini Grand Canyon. with bicycle trails. And you have to know that people on mountain bicycles also like to do interesting things, and so you can exercise your imagination by uh, those bicycles are going to get off and into the canyon and destroy what is a natural ecosystem, and that's Clark's concern. He's aware that at the Department of Natural Resources there has been community advisory services that balance out with particular agencies within the Department of Natural Resources, and they've been proselytizing the state to recreate that public body so that we can discuss this. On the other hand, you have uh, a Vermilion County that is benefiting from the presence of events that involve uh, uh, off-road bicycles. Not so much the motorcycles. That's another territory, but that has been big deal, and so the bicycles are a big deal too. You can slow the process by making the corridors narrow and going one direction, but that's not exactly what we're facing here. We're facing a recreational interest rather than a preservational interest. Uh, there are a couple of lakes here. Uh, Lake Mingo is one that's north, and there's an area to the south which is an open pond. And Clark would like to think that those could be joined along the river. Not easy because some of these areas have been strip mined, but he's been poking around and he's got an idea of where the bicycles would like to go, and it's uh, worth money, and it's state-owned territory, and you're going to work with ecosystems. So, uh, could Sierra Club, which has also been involved in the clean river, uh, is being encouraged to take an interest. They haven't done too much yet because they're still working with Illinois Power and leftover tailings that are leaking into this nationally known clean stream, which has taken people a lot of work to establish. Uh, so how could we? There's a few issues over there. One is the creation of another dam way down south on the Little Vermilion River, but it's the same sort of thing. What do we do with coal, and do we need coal? And people are moving out of coal into other renewable uh, energy paradigms. But it's the same issue. Is the coal company would like to drag very good clean water out of the aquifers and wash coal. And what do they do with the tailings when they've washed the coal? They go to Murdoch and other places and put the tailings down the retired deep mines, and that takes the water, dirty water, into clean aquifers. So we've got two major issues other than bicycles, and the Kickapoo Trail is not yet finished. So uh, the state has opened up the corridor to 150, so you have access to a lake that was closed for a while. There's also the Kickapoo would like to extend into Danville. At the moment, they stop just east of the Kickapoo Trail, or just east of the Salt Fork of the Vermilion. So they have access to the fairgrounds and to the strip mine areas and the various ponds. And they're kind of interesting ponds because they were dug at different eras, and some of them are 75 years old, some of them are older than that, some of them are younger than that. And it's very good for biological interests to be over there seeing what happens with the organisms. So, uh, university students end up there quite a bit. If you take a drag line and pull out some of the muck, you'll find that early on there's lots of uh, bloodworms and lots of a few species that can live in that situation. When you get mature, there are fewer of each organism, but there's a lot of different organisms. And that's sort of watching the phenology of these creatures is exciting. Uh, so even though disturbed, Kickapoo is interesting and an intriguing place. And it's also a place where you can exercise. Sometimes uh, recreation dominates preservation. The recreation people usually have a lot of support, whether it's political or local, uh, and often the preservation people have a hard time stating their case. Thus, the move to ask the Department of Natural Resources to reinstate their public uh, involvement people, advisory committee. It may not have a legal base in the fact that they can't alter laws or what have you, but they can certainly give advice. And in the past, these people have worked at getting the river to be a stream in the first place. Uh, so I was pleased to see Clark Bullard there speaking his piece. It was like some of the rest of us having to get used to to Zoom, and which can be very helpful if you have maps and charts. You can get them up on the screen and see them. And if you're sitting in front of a computer, it's helpful. Remember that you don't have to do a lot to be on Zoom, just have to have a Zoom opportunity, which is easy to get. And then you get a number to enter, and then you get a passcode to enter. So if if you register with someone like the uh, Prairie enthusiasts, you will uh, be given when you register those two numbers, and you just call in and you get on the screen if you need to be, and you can sit there and listen and watch, and there is enough that you get some of the nonverbal images of knowing people and who they are. And I'm going to stop because I think we've run out of our time, and you're going to get the uh, opportunity to see the um, enthusiasts. We just add that there were quite a few people there that were doing things like Audubon runs. Some Audubon people are finding out that their feeders are not visited, and then they find out that they're home to a nest of a Cooper's hawk, which can feed on birds that are coming, and the birds know it. Uh, there are other things like bird counts you can get involved in. So even in the middle of winter, think about getting out in the field. This is Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, WFT Champaign 90.1 on your FM dial. And thanks to WEF, and thanks to Urbana Public Television for screening this sort of work.
I think one of the things that really grabbed me about prairies and really pulled me in was the fact that historically and to present day, prairies and human beings have always had a relationship. In fact, I would argue that prairies wouldn't be here if it weren't for human beings to begin with. You know, all the evidence says is that most of the fires that maintain these sites before European settlement were started by Native Americans. What we have today is a situation where if human intervention doesn't occur, if we don't cut trees, if we don't reintroduce sunlight to these sites, if we don't start burning them, what we are going to have is the continual process of forest succession, where canopies go over. These are sun-loving plant communities, and if you don't have sun hitting these plants, the prairie's gone.
Well, this plant in front of us here is a plant called tuberous Indian plantain, but it has these roundish leaves with parallel veins, much like plantains, and they're kind of waxy. It's unusual for a prairie plant to have this waxy, kind of almost plastic-like structure to it, and it was actually got so rare as on our endangered threatened list for a long time, and now has been proposed to come off. Been successful getting it to reproduce in a lot of restorations. Because these ecosystems evolved and developed the fire for thousands of years, we've learned over time for the past 50, 60 years in investigating this that pretty much come to the conclusion that fire is absolutely critical for the maintenance and recovery of these systems. We augment with other management techniques, you know, mowing, cutting, maybe for some very selective grazing, targeted grazing, but for the general health of the system, to increase all this flowering, fire is very important. In fact, fire will increase the flowering of a lot of these plants two to three-fold. After fire, you go a couple years without fire, they stop blooming. You burn, they're all back blooming again.
It's not the trees that we hate, it's the prairie we love. We remove the trees because generally they're not part of the prairie, except for the oak trees, especially bur oak, which has the thick corky bark that survives the prairie fires so well. Mostly, I think the animals that we want to benefit are species that require large, long vistas. They need open grasslands. They're not really made to be happy in close, dense forests.
There was a lot of native plants and forbs and grasses here. If we had been willing to wait indefinitely, they probably would have made a prairie just about like what we have now. But we're too old to wait forever. And so we collected seeds and then overseeded.
Our process for collecting seed is to collect off the remnants. We hand collect as seeds ripen.
So we take all the seed back to the barn and we put it in wading pools so it'll dry out.
Next step is to what we call process or clean the seed, and that is to break up the seed head, to remove the stems, to get the chaff at least small enough that it'll go through our seeder.
And then once it's dry, we put it in bags and we hang the bags up on wires because we don't want the mice and varmints getting at it. And then we mix all the seed together in different proportions for different habitats. So this is a really dry site, so we'd take seeds that are going to do well in dry sites and we'd mix those in one batch, and then we'll take seeds that are good for mesic sites, that are kind of where your corn grows today, and then we mix that into another batch, and then we'll take seeds that are good in really wet sites like we have over at Shea and Mueller on the other side of the hill over there.
Final step is to put it in the fall, and the seed spreader goes on the back end of the tractor. It just spins it out. Some species we have to grow in seed orchards because they're just gone from the landscape.
These are the rare wood lilies. They're in the lower seed orchard of the mountains grassland area. We're growing them in order to produce seed. And I'm playing part of the insect by deliberately pollinating. There's a bee who's joining me, wants to add in his own pollination, thereby cross-fertilizing and ensuring that as many of these flowers will set seed as possible for the purpose of seed production for us. So never think small of birds and bees. They do this for free all the time.
People love butterflies.
Yeah.
Everybody loves a butterfly, but some people are skittish about bees.
I know bees get a bad rap, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because they have a short period of time to do everything they need to do to reproduce, create the next generation. And the bumblebees overwinter as a queen, and so this big bee emerges as this time of year in the spring, and that's got to start a whole new colony. And so they're really focused on finding those nectar plants, finding the pollen, and they're finely tuned to the variety of plants that are out there. And then the colony dies out during the year. So they got a lot of work to do to build up an entire colony every season. Prairie smoke is a fairly early flower in some of our drier prairies and oak savannas. The prairie smoke blossoms hang downward and they're closed. And the queen needs a good source of protein in the springs. The bumblebee hangs at the underside of this thing and it buzzes at such a frequency that the pollen is vibrated right out of the anthers and drops right onto the bumblebee. They're vibrating at what's just about middle C. Wild lupin is another good source of pollen for our wild bees. And it takes a particularly large and strong bee to open these things up. So they push down the lower petal that's known as the keel. This causes the pollen to be ejected onto the bee. And then when that bee leaves to visit another flower, this one remains with the stigma exposed. So when a bee comes to visit it, it can deposit pollen onto the stigma.
Many of our food and forage crops depend on pollinators, and these prairie remnants and prairie areas help support the pollinators.
Yeah, there's more cranberry growers that are making sure there's prairie plants near the cranberry bogs.
Apples, cherries.
Seen that photograph of the people in China hand pollinating the apple trees?
Yeah, I did. Yep.
It's just unbelievable to me. That could happen here.
It could happen, yeah.
This site has never been plowed. It's a native remnant. It's never been plowed, it's never been grazed. This is exactly the way it looked 150 years ago. We didn't bring in any seed. All we did was clear the trees, clear the brush, and burn it a couple of times. And all of these plants were here, the seed was in the soil, and all it needed was an opportunity to come out. We've got a huge patch of lead plant. We've got tons of rough blazing star, and in the next week or so it'll start to bloom, and it'll just be spectacular out here. My favorite part is how it's changed with our work. When we first came up here, it was completely overgrown with trees, and now you can stand on the bluff and you can watch the eagles, you can watch the turkey vultures, you can watch the herons fly over. I mean, it's a great open space. And across the road, they've been growing corn for the last 50 years. And we worked with the Minnesota Department of Transportation, and we had them stop planting the corn. On the other side, we seeded in a lot. When we were out here planting the seed, we saw some herons and of course a pileated woodpecker. And when we burn out here in the spring, there's always a couple of hawks flying around looking for the mice and the gophers.
One of the things that I've learned working with the prairie enthusiasts is that we can be active participants in nature. We can go into a site, we can fire up the chainsaw, we can conduct a prescribed burn, and we can watch that system respond to what we're doing, and it can be a two-way street. It can be like a dance. Doing prairie restoration reminds you of that you're part of nature, you're not separate from it.
A lot of the scientific research that the prairie enthusiasts are involved in is being used to help with providing more information about restoration and management of these sites. For example, at our preserve not too far from here, the Mounds View grassland, we had an opportunity to take a drained peat wetland about 5 acres. So we took the drain tiles out. We collected vegetation data on the site before we took the drain tiles out, and we scattered seed, and we've done some burns, and we've been collecting data every year, quadrat data, to document that conversion, that change from, drained peat, pretty much no native stuff left. It was actually in corn at one time. And then with our fires, monitoring some of these rare insects, monitoring the birds and how they're responding to the type of grassland habitat we provide, whether it's brome grass or converting to native prairie. We got projects going on collecting data long term to see how those bird communities are changed or altered to respond to those changes in habitat.
So we're in a bottomland area. This was former cropland. You can see by the rolling hills most of the water would come down here and flow in this broad swath headed toward the stream down that way. So this is rich soil. And this plant, the cup plant, is one of the native plants that would grow in this kind of setting. This can be 6-8 feet high by the end of the summer. Even by the middle of the summer you'll see very high. It'll have a bright yellow sunflower on it. It's got a raspy leaf. Sounds like sandpaper. Big square stem. And the leaves come together in the middle, so they hold, and that's why they call it a cup plant. It has water that settles in there after the rain. Tree frogs love that. If you come back in the late evening, you'll probably hear tree frogs in this area. They'll be bathing in the cup plant.
I was a forest person coming into these events and just saying, wow, there's all this knowledge that I'm can have access to if I just hang out with these people. And that was one of the selfish reasons I decided to start this chapter. I'm like, I'll get all the prairie people to come to me and I'll learn from them. And I really still feel like a student. There's not a handbook that says this is how you restore a remnant prairie. It's a shared knowledge and we learn as we go. It's about coming together, talking to each other, and sharing our experiences. And that's part of the community aspect of the prairie enthusiasts that's so important.
It's really kind of fun, that we got these guys. I'm over 70 years old, and other guys, and we walk to the prairie. All of a sudden, somebody finds some little plant growing, and everybody runs over. It's just like a chicken yard where a chicken finds a worm, and all the rest of the chicken come to it and look at it.
Oh, I think the motive for me and for the interns that work under me is love of the land. People who enjoy outdoor nature. We understand this part of the landscape was a prairie oak savanna fire-dependent ecology, and we feel we are taking care of land. So it's very conscious-driven, driven by an environmental ethic that we have. It's definitely not driven by profit. It's driven by what we feel in our hearts. It is hard to explain to people who don't have that sensation, but it's what we have, and we hope that by providing the landscape for people to come and see, it will inspire many others. And clearly it has, otherwise they would not have contributed all the acres we have and the money the prairie enthusiast gets from donors. The people that I work with, they're going to be out in the field every day whether they get paid or not. They dedicate their lives. They retire from their regular job at the IRS, at the auto mechanic, at the bank, and then they become prairie enthusiasts for the rest of their lives. This is something apparently so deep in people that they're willing to do that.
It's kind of therapeutic. I mean, you're outside doing something.
Yeah.
And you get to see and experience all these things that are out on these sites. For me personally, it's just, you give these ecosystems, these plants and insects and things half a chance and you see them coming back. That's what's really rewarding. You throw out this seed, and some of these plantings now are 12 years old and they're starting to look like remnants.
The idea of plants that are still here that Indians had walked on or Indians had used for medicine or for the roots or parts of the plants for food really really amazed me. I guess there was no turning back for me, because as we did more and more prairie burning and brush cutting and finding new species, that was always the neat part.
It is believed that historically, when the bison still were roaming here, that they would use rocks like this one to come and rub when they were changing their fur from one season to another. And you can actually see around the rock when it rains, there's water standing, because all around the rock is like the ground is more compressed, and it's like a little pond with a big rock in the middle of it.
Some people travel the whole world looking for rare animals and rare birds, and here we had the opportunity right in our backyard to find plants that were nearly extinct.
Our native prairie plants historically played a really important role. They're the reason we have the breadbasket of the Midwest, this deep, productive soil. All these fibrous roots. In the prairie, about 60% of the biomass is below ground compared to 40% above ground. All of this root matter underneath is how carbon is fixed into the ground. That's how you get the black soil. And what's happening is that these plants are constantly sloughing off, developing new roots, old roots are dying, and over time that carbon's getting left behind and keeps getting built up. So as these roots die and get replaced, they leave behind little channels when that root system dies out that end up as being channels for water to percolate down through. And they've found with studies that they've done that original prairie sod can mostly eliminate surface water runoff, whereas Kentucky bluegrass lawn is very shallow rooted and it's dense, that a lot of the rain ends up running off. And that happens in croplands as well. You just don't have the air spaces and those channels for that water to get taken down into the groundwater table.
I just think oak savannas are like one of the just most gorgeous ecosystems that are out there, and it used to be really common in this state, and now you just really almost never see them anymore, and it's just a real shame just from fire mismanagement. So any part that I can have to like make the remnants either better or even like bring back.
On a daily basis, I really like seeing all of the rare plants and birds that are on the Prairie Enthusiast lands. But probably my favorite thing that we've done so far is we hand-pollinated the wood lilies at Mounds View. There are so few of them, they don't want to leave it up to chance.
I love working here because mostly the scenery. It's all the different sights, sounds, smells of the different flowers and the birds in the background and all that. It's just soothing. It's hard work, but it's very worthwhile.
It's also really nice being able to make a change on the environment you're working on and really see that you're making a positive difference for conservation.
I have 4 grandchildren, and when I take them into the woods or prairie, first I have to disarm them from all the technology. And when they were little, I used to take them for listening walks at night. They would all hold their rope and have a flashlight, and we walk through the woods and just listen to leaves and grasses and stuff. But that is so eaten up by technology that it's just, I'm sure in their psychic, they might have to go to 5-year psychoanalysis before they would discover they ever experienced that. You know, only man in his linear thinking always creates a simple environment.
Prairies are endless grasslands, and we don't have that. What we've got is prairie remnants. And that's really the best terminology, because we just have bits and pieces of the ecosystem.
Like all prairies, remnants are basically in the poorest possible soil conditions that have survived. Railroad tracks, old abandoned cemeteries, and land that couldn't be plowed. And I know we need corn and beans and so forth, but southern Minnesota has become a bit of a green desert, really.
Just think of yourself as a monarch butterfly being hatched in Canada and on your migrational trip to Mexico for the winter. Think about flying over Iowa, that's corn from the northern border almost to the southern border, flying over Illinois, which is 90% corn, flying over Oklahoma and Kansas, which is all in agriculture. It amazes me that they can find enough food to even make that trip. I don't even have any idea what they'd be nectaring on.
You know, a monarch would have to pack a lunch to get across this area. So it's good to have these little islands of seed beds that we can collect seed and spread out to other areas.
Even these small patches of 5 or 6 acres that I've got here that's in prairie grasses and forbs seems to be vital to a lot of species. It seems to be a wayside where they can rest.
To take a cornfield and restore it back to prairie or savanna, probably we're talking more like a century or two before you're going to get back a composition of insects and soil organisms and plants that really equal what the remnants were like. The Prairie Enthusiast has a 3-part mission, the primary one being protection. We have conservation easements. That's one tool where the landowner retains title and there's just an enforcement to keep it as a conservation land. And that's good. It works for a lot of situations, but it's not as secure as having title. When the conservation group actually has title to the land, we aren't in a position of, in perpetuity trying to defend this easement. The Sugar River Savanna Preserve here is an example of a restoration and recovery of a site that's getting really close to a remnant. My wife and I ended up doing a bargain sale to the Prairie Enthusiast to have permanent protection done on the site. Starting in the 30s, my family started farming just north of here. And in this picture, you can see in 77, that bottomland was basically solid re-canary grass. And with these pictures you can now see today of the site, you can see where we've been able to push the re-canary grass back with frequent burning and reintroducing things like Joe Pye weed and wild sunflowers and things like that. Over 38 years now, we've kind of brought the site back to something close to the original oak savanna. 270 or so species survived on site. With the fires and bringing in more seed, we've increased that and brought in another 130 or so species. It is a restoration, but it also is a remnant to some degree. It's kind of a hybrid situation.
Finally, it reached the point when I understood that by doing prairie conservation and preaching about its values, that I was putting back. I was giving back in some way that was important for me and leaving a trace of myself here. This pod right here is purple milkweed. You can see I've written on there. It's the only one I could find this year. Here's the seed inside here. And the seed is pretty ripe. The purple milkweed is listed as an endangered species in Wisconsin. Well, our savannas have closed in, become more brushy and more dense with smaller trees. So the only habitat left suitable for purple milkweeds is on roadsides.
When we first did some initial clearing, all of a sudden we had this very attractive plant called purple milkweed, which popped up, and we didn't know what it was. It turned out to be an endangered species in Wisconsin. Its habitat is savanna, and we were creating the habitat for it, but the plant had been there. And as we have cleared more and more land, we've had more and more purple milkweeds pop up. What they needed was a little more light and fire, which would eliminate a lot of the competitors, and then they came up.
I would say that the day that we had the weed trees and underbrush and junk out of here so that it was an open savanna, about that day we saw a red-headed woodpecker, which we'd never seen before here or for me anywhere. They're savanna specialists. They prefer savannas and are rarely found anywhere else. And now they're quite rare because savannas are very rare. We have quite a few here now, and that's very rewarding. We get excited every time we see one. The rewards are slow in coming sometimes. I like to say that you have to live a very long time to be a restoration worker because the rewards are rather slow over the years. but it's in pretty good shape now. There's always more to do, and it's just so beautiful.
I think what's important on these prairies, people seem to recognize the importance of saving grassland habitat for birds. And they certainly admire the flowers and the butterflies, but most people don't understand how essential the prairies are for napping. You really can't take a good nap unless it's quiet and peaceful. So prairies are ideal.